Chapter 22. A pleasant day to you, brother and sister. I see that you are still standing in the classroom which we had visited on our previous occasion. And as there are still many important questions in your mind, we will also, likewise, in answering your questions, anticipate those of your fellow Earthmen. You may have thought it odd that you found this group of Earth people sitting at their desks, which were quite clearly molded after the pattern of the desks which were attended by these people as youngsters. Aside from being utilitarian, the main purpose was that learning and being taught here on Venus would fill in some very obvious gaps in their previous scholastic education. Your Earth system of education reminds me somewhat of a great sieve where the youngsters are pressed through and all emerge exactly the same size and shape. I'm using this as the mental metaphor. There is a singular lack of proper education in the spiritual concepts. I do not mean the kind which are associated with parochial schools, nor of any such theologies which are more or less orthodox. And while these religious concepts seem to fill the need for some sort of Sunday activities, such inspirational values as are thus incurred are quickly lost in the shuffle on Monday. There is also a singular lack of recognizing the individual propensities of each child. While there has been some vague attempts to individualize the child, there has not yet been a constructive idea or movement to properly institute a spiritual educational system which can be combined with their other scholastic activities. Neither will there be any attempts until such further day when the various sects and denominations quit quarreling among themselves long enough to form such a spiritual combination. I might say this also would not contain the unrealistic and confusing elements which are contained in the expression of many of the denominations and sects. Such a program would have to be instituted and moralized by an entirely New Age concept, new at least to many of those who would have to support it, while their sons and daughters were being educated. We, who have been on the path for a long time, know these truths and principles. The other factor in individualizing a child's educational program is only crudely recognized by letting the child wander around the classroom, swishing his hands in paint or pinching a piece of modeling clay into some shapeless form. It is theorized that a child should seek out, in such a free expression, his latent talents. However, only an old soul in a child's body could thus individualize his own strongest, personalized traits. With the average child, these traits are too submerged and interwoven with lesser traits, which when compiled together from such outside stimuli as curiosity in his new world, will often cause a child to seek out some rather strange and unrelated or even abortive expressions. No serious attempt is really made to direct his life expression or a vocational guidance until he reaches the last few years of his education. By that time, he will have formed very strong and very definite thought patterns and philosophies. Under such conditions, he has not the proper perspective to relate himself to his true purpose. He will often wander the world with his eyes filled with the glamour of fame and easy money, which he thinks could be his through some field of endeavor to which he is entirely unsuited. He quite often goes through life in the pursuance of these false objectives, and thus comes to the end of his days, unsuccessful, bitter, and frustrated. In escaping his physical body, he may, after several reincarnations, find himself entering one of the great colleges or universities in one of the more highly evolved astral planets. There, he will complete his education and his specialized training, which will later on permit him to again appear on the Earth and in his true expression. He thus becomes the great artist, or poet, or scientist. And in bringing to a full conclusion his rightful expression, he will have dissipated the heavy load of karma. It is easy to see that a more logical course to pursue would be one in which the educational factors were included in each child's life, which would enable him to at least start if not fully become, whatever it was that his divine mind had conceived him to be. It would only be necessary to make an accurate diagnosis of each child's potentialities, and then institutionalize him through his educational period in what he was best adapted to do. This is being done on countless other planets, such as the one with which you are more familiar in your own solar system and which you call Mars. It is quite obvious after a bit of careful thought that your Earth plane would soon be a new place with a new way of life, if such a program were fully exploited. And it would save many people many needless reincarnations and thousands of years of time in gaining their rightful expression. Our educational system here on Venus is not confined to teaching small groups in such capacities as would first start them on their right pathway. The people in this room are learning certain things which will be fitted in the proper place in their Earth life, so that by utilizing this knowledge in their future days, there will be no obvious deficiency of which they might be vaguely aware if this placing is not done. Even the desks fit in with the scene. In this city, there are many other classrooms, as well as a number of auditoriums, all of which have functional purposes of serving the needs of different groups or intellectual strata of the lower orders of Earth planets. Many of the higher masters often come and give lectures and demonstrations in these auditoriums, which are partially attended by numbers of Earth people. These, of course, being the more highly advanced people which are serving the Earth humanity in some great capacity. These classes have been attended many times by people like Sister Kenny, Florence Nightingale, Mr. and Mrs. Curie, Koch, Pasteur, Beethoven. In fact, I could name hundreds which come from all of the professions which are connected with the service of humanity. Many great blessings in the form of inventions or discoveries are thus given to the Earth people, which has been partially made possible by attendance in these classrooms and lecture halls. In the course of evolution, many individuals in progressing upward often attain outstanding scholastic achievements in one of the very highest astral planets, and will quite naturally be interested in seeking an outlet for his best expression. He will be infused with the glow of service to his fellow men. He will then reincarnate and emerge in a physical form in some lower Earth order. Very often, however, the circumstances are such that on finding himself in low-order vibrations, he will be unable to express the purpose for which he came. In the seething unrest of his mind, he will send out thoughts for help, which are intercepted by some of the spiritual entities with which he is associated, and who are working for his good. And in the interception of his plea for help, he can be led into a Venusian classroom, where the necessary lacking ingredients of knowledge are placed in his psychic mind. Thus, when he awakens in the following days, after these sleep-time courses, he will begin to find the way and means to bring into full expression the purpose of his Earth life. The Earth scientist or doctor is trying to visualize that the seat of thought and concept lies within the gray mass you call brain. This is a badly mistaken fallacy. The brain is only an outward expression or coordinator of the innumerable life experiences of each individual which are reflected into it from the psychic mind. It is also said quite truly that the average Earth person very seldom, if ever, in his Earth life, reaches a point where he can think constructively. When I say constructively, I mean that he cannot voluntarily construct an idea or purpose without the association of his countless experiences contained in his thought patterns, which are reflected from the psychic self. Any constructive thought must come through the psychic self, from the superconsciousness. The superconscious is the part of each individual which, being connected to the fountainhead, is the all-seeing, all-knowing, all-anticipating intelligence, which sometimes trickles through the mesh of the psychic self in tiny droplets. Such droplets always are the originating sources of man's greatest constructive intelligence and inspiration. Now the time for rest has arrived, So I will leave you for the coming hours. May you enjoy your Earth life. Malvar. Chapter 23. Greetings, brother and sister. In going through my previous transmissions, I have found that while I have covered many subjects, I have not yet discussed government and leadership of the nations of the world. And while we here in this city of Azure do not relate ourselves in our service to you in this capacity, yet it was deemed essential that this very important topic should be discussed. Throughout the ancient and modern civilizations which have existed on your planet, and these have been many and varied, yet in a broad sense, they have all had many common basic elements and flaws. The theory of government is based on a natural desire of the many communities, states, and peoples existing as a nation to factually integrate their many diversified ways of life into a harmonious combination with a peaceful expression of their life as best suits their needs. I am speaking, of course, of such forms of government as you call democratic, socialistic, or communistic. In the later form, I am not referring to that great country across the sea which calls itself communistic, but which is really totalitarian. I am referring to the pure and basic concept of government by the people. Even in the past, history shows that while some governments were ruled by monarchs or emperors, they too existed as a byproduct of the people's will. Because the nations and peoples of your world, as well as of other similar planets, have not conceived a way of life motivated by the divinity of concept which is contained in the Golden Rule. Restricting measures are necessarily imposed by the proper functions of law bodies to properly enforce such restriction. The peoples of your Earth planet have not yet devised a perfect form of government, nor will they do so until spiritual orders of concept are entered into. Many of your political leaders are motivated and sustained by high moral standards. However, due to the reactionary way of life of most of the people, the leaders too must participate in such reactionary policies. This is one more example of the many kinds of treadmills the Earth people get themselves into by dealing only with the materialistic side of their lives. They have not yet learned of a united and concerted spiritual effort of thought and action, which would quickly dissipate the fear of war and political unrest. We here on Venus do not sanction the use of the table of peace where the nations of the world are assembled as a place for strife and bickering. We do not condone the holding of the quill which is plucked from the dove of peace in your right hand, while your left hand passes out the implements of war. Nor is any nation less guilty, while you are thus employed in scheming and devising ways to use your ideas and your philosophies of life in your peace treaties. Your armies are shooting down the soldiers of another army, which is likewise employed in scheming and contriving to force another idea of peace into your way of life. Such fallacious attitudes of peace have bred new and innumerable wars, killed millions of peoples, and decimated many nations. Thousands of such treaties have been written, and even as they were signed, the signers were contriving new aggressions in their minds. You have, in the last years, and I am speaking to the nations of the world, capped a fearful climax unto the greatest catastrophe which has ever happened in the history of your Earth planet. After years of bestial, bloody war, a new and terrible misuse of God's power was exploded into the Wursal. In a few days, about 1.5 million souls were blasted from the Earth, or rendered helpless, while millions more were left homeless and in fear and trembling by this awful thing. Now must all the people of the world walk this path of fear. You know not the day or hour when your world will topple down upon you. And even now you are in fear and trembling from the awful atomic weapons. Yet you are devising new and more terrible ones. Surely this mad and awful race leads but to one place: oblivion. We in the upper worlds cannot use strong enough language in our warnings. Nor do you know the even more drastic effects which atomic explosions, whether thermonuclear or otherwise, have in some of the astral worlds. If you could but catch one small glimpse into these great unseen worlds about you which you call dimensions, and see your relationship to them, and how these atomic explosions were letting loose fearful energies which are breaking down and destroying many of the natural protective barriers between you and some of the great astral fields of negativity. If the leaders of the nations could see these things, they would soon convert atomic devices into more useful purposes, or quickly render them useless. We in our position, working with all other spiritual planes, are doing our utmost to influence your leaders into more constructive efforts at making lasting peace. As of today and this hour, there is a glimmering hope. The leaders of your America and of the great nations across the sea have been making a united and concerted effort to make this peace factual. The history of the next few years will determine whether you are successful or whether your Earth planet will become a blackened, decimated cinder. It might be well for the people of each nation, individually and collectively, to band together and put their last ounce of will and constructive prayer into crystallizing the efforts of your leaders. You in America are fortunate at this critical time to have genuinely inspired and motivated leadership. May I also add that the past leaders of your great nation are also behind this concerted movement for peace, and should you succeed, your efforts shall richly reward you, for then it shall be that your nation shall enter into, along with the other nations of your world, a way of life which has been called the Aquarian Age, an age in which God truly rules the world through the divinely inspired leadership of him who you call Christ. For this time, peace be with you. Malvar. Chapter 24, Sunday. A pleasant holy day to you, brother and sister. I will attempt to discuss in this transmission two basic and fundamental instincts of creation which have been implanted in the life expression of every living creature on your Earth and other similar planets. These two instincts are self-preservation and sex. It is obvious with a moment's thought that I could devote a whole volume to each instinct. It is these instincts which often, in a perverted relationship, cause mankind his greatest sorrows. Likewise, in a normal relationship, his most joyous and useful expressions. Many species of plant, insect, and animal life exhibit strong and normal relationships with these subconscious motivating factors. The will to live and the desire to procreate are the basic elements which make life possible for all living things to survive and multiply. The tiny ant or the honeybee are familiar to you all. Likewise are the squirrels. They and many other creatures spend many hours in carefully storing a food supply against the time when there is no natural source. However, these creatures seldom, if ever, die of conditions such as heart failure, stomach ulcers, hardening of the arteries, and other diseases which man inflicts upon himself in his perverted anxiety and fear for his security. While these two instincts are distinct and separate, yet they are closely interwoven and are always found in close relationship. It is these perverted instincts by which man has created for himself a treadmill-like existence. If you remember the pictures of the ancient treadmills where a poor slave was forced to mount an endless chain of steps, this chain of steps was so geared that by its movement it would grind corn or pump water. Often the slave was forced to activate this machine until he dropped dead. In your modern civilization, this same condition literally exists for untold millions of people. The great masses of the population have created a highly competitive way of life, and so each man goes about trying to wrest from his fellow man the necessities of life. He has found it necessary to contrive new and more cunning ways to bring these necessities to him. So, with each passing hour, more and more cleverly contrived ways are brought into existence to further exploit his fellow men. Nearly all Earth people have some vague notion that their material possessions and wealth are their security. Many persons thus acquire a perverted relationship, and thus it is they may amass huge fortunes, which of course do them no good at all. While they are reveling in their false sense of power and security, they are also stricken with the pangs of inner conscience. It is the still, small voice that points the finger of guilt. And so they seek to placate themselves by giving away portions of their superfluous wealth to various charities or foundations. Or they may, at the time of separation, endow almost all of this wealth to such purposes. And while this is a good and noble thing in itself, yet always does this type of donor seek, in his false sense of security, to perpetuate himself forever in the minds of his countrymen. And so, with each gift, goes his name, which is firmly attached. He erects huge buildings which are called by his name, or he may create monuments of stone with his image engraved thereon, thinking that he will thus feel more secure. It is quite obvious that mankind needs a new and stronger spiritual concept to supplant this useless, unintelligent waste of life. It can be truly said that this sense of insecurity often directly has caused wars. A moment's thought on your part will bring to mind a great number of possibilities. Of course, there are many millions of your countrymen who have a more normal relationship. They try in their own way to adapt their life so that it will not entail too many of the superfluities. They also try to develop the spiritual nature within themselves. However, here again is the lack of constructive knowledge coupled with the inescapable pattern of your civilization. Thus they also have become slaves. It can also be said that the female of your species appears to be more cunning than the male. It is usually the male who breaks himself down on this treadmill years before his natural conclusion. He has contrived a vast array of chemical substances and adornments whereby the female decorates her person to further superimpose the false aura of glamour which is strongly attached to the sex instinct. And here again is a strange paradox. The males are continually creating new conveniences for their females, while they in turn find more leisure time to devote to their persons. Their homes are an array of mechanical, electrical, and chemical conveniences. And so, with the ever-increasing exploitation and creation practiced by the male, he finds himself led farther and farther away from a true course in life. He has even invented a great system of laws and enforcement agencies which are designed primarily to circumvent his fellow men from doing things which would be more clever than he. So, he has thus created a comparatively large group of people who indulge in malpractice, which is considered criminal. In this, he has found ways to circumvent the other laws which have inspired his criminal malpractice. You know of these things and call them by such names as gambling, horse racing, sexual prostitution, various rackets which are sometimes interwoven with your politics. In getting into these things, even I would get confused. It is small wonder that your world is in such a state of affairs. I will not attempt to go farther into this all-important factor or instinct of self-preservation. However, I would like to touch more directly upon the instinct of sex. Here again, animals and insects often express a more normal relationship than man, while it is said that man has a higher degree of intelligence. Yet he seems completely ignorant of the more advanced psychic relationships of sex. He may know of the biological and some of the psychological aspects, but seldom, if ever, does he connect himself with his many life relationships in past reincarnations. Thus, in his seeking a mate, he usually follows the same pattern which is exhibited by the lower orders of animals. He or she will move around in their particular society until they meet one of the opposite gender who seems to stimulate their physical reactions more than anyone heretofore previously encountered. This seems to be the motivating factor in marriage. The very high divorce rate, which in some sections is almost 1-to-1, shows how fallacious this reactionary and illogical type of marriage can be. There are, of course, many other factors which may enter into such divorce actions. The whole of your civilization is quite conducive to all types of abnormal separations. They are all lumped together and found in the false superstructure which has been erected in lieu of a more basic spiritual concept. Very often, two people who marry may have formerly been mother and son, or father and daughter. Or they may have been any one of a number of combinations of such family relationships. Or they may even marry from a psychic sense of guilt that they have wronged the other in some previous life. To reflect a moment's thought into the possibilities of these factors, you will begin to see how little the Earthman knows of himself. Likewise, you mothers who bear children. The child who comes into your womb is not created by you. You only grow the body. He has found, through you, the doorway back into the world, which may have been his home for many lifetimes. He has been attracted to you, in most cases, because of certain harmonic frequency relationships. To those who have knowledge of genetics and believe that a child's propensities are contained in the chromosomatic structure at the time of his conception, may I say that this may be partially or even wholly true, as far as the physical body is concerned. A child may borrow the dark eyes and brown hair of the mother, or any of the innumerable configurations of physical traits from either or both parents. Yet he does not borrow his spiritual nature, nor the things which he truly is. However, to you who are parents, may I caution you that the factors of environment with which you surround your child may do either one of two things. They may warp or distort him, or they may add to an often expressed spiritual concept, which may have been the motivating cause for your child to come back into this world. So therefore, be careful. Each child is a charge which has been given to you by the Creator. Yours is the responsibility of stewardship in a young and formative period of his life. He may be an old soul who has sought you out, thinking that he could find in the outlet or doorway which you have created for him the true expression and purpose toward which he has developed through countless ages. Try to recognize in him that he, like yourself, is an individual divine expression of God. You may not know in this lifetime that your husband or your wife could have been your brother or sister. Neither will you know that your son or daughter may have been mother or father, or that they could have been someone whom you severely wronged. Nor should you try to do so. Your lack of clairvoyant faculties would prohibit any factual knowledge. And until you have developed such latent outlets of clairvoyant expression, let us instead pursue a more realistic policy in dealing with the various members of your household and your social structure. Yes, even your friends may have been linked to you with family ties. Let us all, therefore, treat each other as brother and sister. Let us see in each other that we are individual expressions of divinity, and let us all participate in this universal brotherhood and express our fullest measure of love. So rest in peace, Malva. Chapter 25. It was quite obvious that the two preceding chapters, inasmuch as they contained most of the relative values of man's physical and material expressions on his earth plane, could not be given in their entirety in two transmissions. So if you will have the patience to bear with me, so that I may point up and objectify the salient points, future generations of mankind will be able to find a much more peaceful and productive way of life. I have pointed out that while many governments were primarily instituted and conceived with righteous spiritual concepts, such concepts will go astray unless they are properly activated with the correct fundamental understanding of man's spiritual nature. Such is the case with your Constitution and the idealisms which were interjected into its construction. However, it is a mistake to believe that any man or group of individuals can properly execute and transmit such idealism into your ways of life unless properly ordained for this purpose. There is in your government, as in many others, a distinct schism or cleavage between the spiritual expression and the way in which the government is expressed. The direction of any nation and the expression of the people thereof should always be so constituted as to be the function of what you might call a priesthood. Several other ancient civilizations, as Atlantis, Lemuria, Egypt, and many others have at different periods, existed under such a governmental function as was expressed in the divine spiritual concepts of the priesthood of the temple. I realize, however, that your present day would express innumerable spiritual concepts in a likewise uncounted number of temples. These are all good and a necessary spiritual function in their own relative positions, or should I say they are much better than nothing. Yet, none of the spiritual concepts which exist on your Earth planet today are sufficient unto themselves to serve in a direct capacity as a spiritual government of the people. Thus it is that you have come to great strife among your nations, for you do not properly understand your relationship with your brothers and sisters about your world. Such a peaceful utopia as you have pictured for yourselves cannot and will not be resolved from such widespread differences of concept. In a future millennium, as it is called in your Bible, man will eventually unite himself into a spiritual brotherhood. He will find that all peoples and nations will function quite properly under a spiritual leadership which is motivated by the divine principles of brotherly love. Such a government will be directed and expressed to the people from a temple in which certain individuals will appear on your earth plane. And these individuals shall be, as you call them, avatars or masters. Today, each man and woman in your great nation, and so likewise in many other nations, are all sending forth a united and concerted prayer or a plea to the inner consciousness for a solution. And so God will thus send you one. It shall not come suddenly or with fanfare and trumpets, but only gradually as it can be assimilated and woven into the structures of everyday life. I also pointed out some factors in your sex relationship with your fellow men or women. There is at the present time a tremendous load of guilt among your people, which stems from the ignorant and unrealistic attitudes towards sex relationships. It is also a seeming paradox that while man tries to live a moral and somewhat spiritual life and build within his consciousness something of a balance in his nature and purpose in your world, yet, as I have said before, such spiritual motivation often goes astray if without a knowledge of the active working principles and their proper application. In your world, sex has become a malicious and openly perverted concept. There is a tremendous exploitation of sex in almost every walk of life. The signboards and shops of your communities are crowded with displays of the almost uncovered female form, the full impact of the autosuggestive usage of which is intended to attract the eye of the passing male. Such a practice is licentious and demoralizing. Likewise are all the fields of the entertainment world cluttered up with these autosuggestive sex malpractices. It is a common sight in many of your large cities to see a church alongside of a rooming house which is devoted to sex perversion. If I can quote one of your earth adages, you are neither fish nor fowl. While you cry for spirituality and a release from your fears and frustrations, yet you foster and nourish practices which are open violations of such a nature that they would obstruct any spiritual help which might be poured into your earth life. We here in the spiritual realms would like a little more cooperation. Be sincere when you pray to God, and do not defeat the purpose of your prayers by indulging yourself in the negative materialistic perversions of which your world is full. This problem of sex and moral issues, which are so closely related in your everyday life, will also be solved in a gradual manner in a future day, when you begin to recognize more fully the latent, unexpressed clairvoyant qualities which are a part of every individual's concept. You will also begin to develop a new science of therapy which will more fully utilize these clairvoyant gifts of more highly advanced souls. You will also be able to institutionalize within your hospitals and clinics certain vital spiritual elements which you call faith healing or spiritual healing. By consciously recognizing and fostering such an attitude, which will bring into existence proper training and specialization of clairvoyance and spiritual healing. You will thus find a tremendous relief and a factual cure from the pressures of ignorance and superstition which have bred these so-called incurable diseases into your way of life. Such training and specialization, however, will also be a part of that future day, and will be a functional part of that great temple which will not only guide the political destinies of man, but shall also direct his spiritual concepts. For only in the spiritual concepts will you find the true evaluation and solution for all the ills, political, physical, or otherwise, which have been so incurred from a proper concept of spiritual wisdom. It is my purpose in the creation of this book that these many factors shall be objectively pointed out to you, and thus may it be that what is given here today shall become part of the spiritual structures for that future age, your millennium, your Aquarius, your utopia, Malva. Chapter 26. Greetings, dear ones. And may I say first that something like congratulations are in order, as I can see that you are now viewing us in our proper relationship, and as a consequence, you will be taken to the altar room, where you will witness the emergence, or as you call it, birth of a person into our higher order. She is a woman whom we shall, for convenience sake, call Order. She comes from one of the lower orders here on Venus, and she has been here and studied while in a clairvoyant state. Yet today she will actually be given a body such as ours, so that she may resume her life here among us. Now let us cross over through the central pavilion of the temple, and further down the hall we shall enter the altar room. As you can see, it is not a very large room, but it has some differences which are worth mentioning. At the far end, there is a raised platform which seems to be surrounded in a semicircle by a series of crystal-like mirrors. These are about 7 feet high in your Earth measurement, and resemble something like a multi-section screen such as may be found in an Earth home. Their function is to help concentrate the mind energies which will be projected by those who actively participate. Overhead in the ceiling, you will notice that there are 3 large discs of crystal which are shaped somewhat like curved lenses. One is a deep blue, another is red like a ruby, and the third is a golden yellow. They are so focused that they will project a multicolored beam or matrix of energy into the area just in front of the reflecting crystal mirrors. There are also, out in front, about 20 feet away, a semicircle of 7 low-raised footstools which are used to kneel on. Throughout the room, there is a beautiful, intense radiation. The floor is also covered with something which could be called a carpet, but is actually a soft, thick sheet of radiant energy, something like the more familiar ectoplasm, except that it, too, is a bright golden color. In the rear of this room are a number of benches, which are sometimes partially filled by those who are closely associated with those who participate in this emergence. As there is some time yet before the ceremony takes place, let us sit quietly on one of these benches while I explain to you something more of the principles of concept and why it is possible that you are now seeing us for the first time in a true relationship. The words concept and perception in general may mean somewhat the same. Concept is associated in an overall sense with the eye and mind, whereas percept is usually associated with the more physical relationships. In some of our previous transmissions, there were several statements which I made which are apt to be a bit confusing. I stated that as you first saw us here, we would appear somewhat as you yourself appeared to others in your physical world. Later on, you again saw us where we appeared to be like large glowing masses of light. If a group of people saw a thief fleeing down the street, they would later on all give a somewhat different description of the fleeing man. The principal reason for this should be more fully understood, as in understanding this principle, you will understand why the Earth plane people are constantly deluding themselves. The mechanics of seeing on your physical plane are something like this. Your eye focuses through the lens the various light frequencies which are reflected by tiny light-sensitive cells mounted on the apexes of tiny rods and cones, which cover the screen or retina at the rear of the eyeball. The light frequency impulses are received into the brain at the rate of about 20 per second. Your brain must then sort them in proper order with other memory impressions, so that they are properly placed or conceived and related to all of your past experiences of reception. In most people, the amount of synchronization varies considerably. In other words, if the eye sends faster than the brain can receive and classify, an incomplete picture is formed. Later on, the mind will attempt to fill in such missing portions of the picture. This it does by taking some portions of other pictures which were received at a different time. Thus, the person will vary in his description of a scene or episode from the description of the man standing next to him. Here on Venus, our perception and conception is exactly reversed, in a general sense, from that of your Earth people. There, as you cannot see spirit, the physical world is the most predominant, so that you view all things physically. Here we view things exactly opposite. We see all things in a spiritual world and in a spiritual way. We can, of course, just as you do, but in an advanced way, see into your physical world. You can clairvoyantly see into our spiritual world. That is why, when you first saw us here, you would have, of course, quite likely been able to see us partially in our, shall I say, physical bodies, and your mind would automatically fill in that which you could not see. Such a view process would happen in a similar way to any other form of man who did not have our physical appearance. Therefore, he would see us physically as related to himself. You must bear in mind that what you call our physical form is an advanced spiritual form, while it does assume a shape and form which, as you now see, is quite like your own. If you remember when you first saw Ut, that he appeared as a golden man. As you see us now, we are somewhat like that, except that we are very radiant. We seem to be projecting from within many radiant shafts of light of brilliant intensity and many colors. Completely around us is a broad frequency band of many colors. This is the aura, and is much more intense and radiant than your own. In a general physical way, we are about 6 or 7 feet tall. We do not weigh because we are not affected by the gravitational field. Looking at my features closely, you see I have a high forehead and my hair comes to my shoulders. I have 2 well-shaped ears. My nose is straight. I have a well-formed chin. And my eyes are very large and seem to shine or glow. Over my body, I seem to be wearing, as near as you can tell, a shimmering, translucent tunic. In fact, my face, as I do not have a beard, seems to look like several of the Earth pictures which have been drawn to resemble masters. These descriptions, as I have given them to you, and as you see them, are as near as they can be put into Earth language. However, remember when you come over here, in some future spiritual evolution, we may, at that time, appear somewhat different. I might mention that several Earth-plane people, such as I have described previously, saw us and the higher masters as intense white masses of fire. So, as I said before, concept is a matter of relativity in the position you occupy in your evolution. But now it is time for the ceremony. The benches around us have been filled as we talked with my fellow Venusians. I will not attempt to call them to you by name, as we actually have no name here. Names are something which help to classify personality traits. Now there are 7 people coming into the room in single file, being led by one of our very advanced Venusian, Shartok. Now they are taking their positions and kneeling on the small stools on the floor. There are 3 of the feminine gender on the left side, and 3 masculine on the right, with the leader in the center. Now you will hear some kind of a strange music which seems to come from nowhere. The people in the semicircle have their gazes intently focused on the area just in front of the mirrors. The music now seems to be growing more intense. It would be difficult to describe these sounds, as they are actually made by energy which is being concentrated into intense beams by the minds of these 7 persons. It is something like a peculiar whistling, singing, or rustling. Now you seem to see a shaft of radiant light building up in front of the mirrors. This light seems to be filled with tiny, brilliant stars which are moving about and blinking in a very rapid fashion. Now gradually this radiant shaft begins to expand and grow larger. There is also an appearance of solidity which is becoming increasingly more dense. Now you're seeing a vague outline of a human form, slowly forming just as an artist might be sketching it on paper. The features of the face begin to form in their proper places. The arms and hands and fingers are also appearing. Now she is almost here. As you see, she is a very beautiful woman. And when I say beautiful, it is a spiritual beauty which surpasses any physical beauty which you may have seen. Her features are fine and well-formed. Her eyes are very large, lustrous, glowing pools of light. Her hair is a tumbled mass of waves cascading over her shoulders. Her arms are slender, her fingers long and tapering. Just like us, she is clothed in a shimmering veil of light. But now the process of emergence is complete. The kneeling people stand up. The music has ceased. Order steps down and is welcomed with loving embraces into the arms of her new parents and her brothers and sisters. I, too, am overcome with emotion. So for now, in the excitement of welcoming our new sister, may I say, until some future time, rest in peace. Malvar.